Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Franklin Park Circuit Drive Community Meeting #1. I'm Amy Lene, Project Manager from the Boston Parks and Recreation Department. We're here to discuss safety improvements for Circuit Drive, including traffic calming, enhanced pedestrian crossings, and drainage improvements. This was based on recommendations that came out of the Franklin Park Action Plan and the next steps. I do want to thank you for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you being here, especially given how nice it is outside right now. And I'd also like to welcome any elected officials and staff who may be on the call and ask that you raise your hand if you'd like to say something at this time.
I saw that Russell Holmes is on. Oh, sir.
Thank you, but I want to say nothing. I just want to get right into it. Thank you, guys.
Well, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
All right.
Great. So I can go to the next slide. I have a few items to go over before we start the presentation. Actually, go back one slide. So that's the meeting recording. So just please know that this meeting is being recorded. That way we can post it to the project webpage. It should be posted in about a week, and we'll add the link to the chat for the project webpage in case you'd like to view this presentation again or share with neighbors who were unable to attend. And during this presentation, we ask you to keep your video off and microphone muted. During the discussion session, we encourage you to turn your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. Interpretation was not requested for this meeting, but please know that translation and interpretation services are offered free of charge. Anyone can email me to make a request for future services, and we'll add my email to the chat. So we do encourage everyone, sorry, I can go back one slide. We encourage everyone to share their questions and comments either verbally or in the chat. Please be respectful of others and mindful of everyone's time. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly via email if you would like to provide comments that way or discuss the project further. Next slide, please. In a moment, our design team will give a short presentation followed by a listening and discussion session. If a question or comment comes to mind during the presentation, feel free to add it to the chat and we'll address it after the presentation. If you would like to speak during the discussion session and you're joining via Zoom on a computer, use the raise hand button and we will unmute you. If anyone is calling in on a phone, use *9 to raise your hand. Once we call on you, use *6 to unmute and to mute again. Next slide, please. And next slide. So we will start with an introduction of the project team, followed by an overview of the project. Our design team will then present the history of the site and an inventory and analysis of the existing conditions. This will be followed by a listening and discussion session where we hope to get your feedback. And last, we'll go over closing remarks and next steps. Once again, I'm Amy Lene, Project Manager from Boston Parks. Also joining us from Boston Parks, we have Michael McMillan, Community Outreach Coordinator, and he will be moderating the meeting tonight. And Lauren Bryant, Project Manager for the Franklin Park Action Plan and other capital projects in the park. For the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, we've listed our neighborhood liaisons. They're a great resource for community concerns. And then our consultant team is Niche Engineering, covering transportation and green infrastructure. Reed Hildebrand, who is the lead designer for the Franklin Park Action Plan, is on the team in an advisory role. Next slide, please. So this is the first community meeting for the Circuit Drive Safety Improvement Project. With the feedback from tonight and from an online survey we'll distribute soon, the design team will develop a concept plan to share at a second engagement event in the summer. And then at the final meeting this fall, we will share the recommended design. And then during the fall and winter, our design team will develop construction documents and also go to Landmarks Commission for project approval. And then we expect to start construction on the roadway improvements in early 2026 and complete the work in summer 2026. So Circuit Drive is one of several projects going on at Franklin Park. I will add a link in the chat for the Franklin Park Initiatives webpage in case you would like to look into the other projects in more detail. Next slide. And then in addition to landmarks, this is a list of city departments we will be coordinating with on this project, as well as outside agencies and entities. So this large group of stakeholders means that we'll be trying to address a variety of different concerns and really trying to dig into it and solve those issues. Next slide. So this is an overview of our approach to open space design, which includes the City of Boston priorities, safety guidelines and regulatory guidelines, such as ADA, community input, such as this meeting tonight, and the Parks and Recreation goals. Next slide. The City of Boston priorities include delivering exceptional constituent services, green and growing, family-friendly, closing the racial wealth gap, and healthy and safe. Next slide. And then for all of our renovation projects, these are the department goals that guide the process. So they include creating spaces that are accessible and available to all, spaces that have a diverse, balanced, and efficient mix of uses, a process that includes meaningful, inclusive community engagement, spaces that incorporate adaptive and resilient landscapes, so designing for current and future challenges with climate change, and last, promote connections between spaces and people. So with that, I will hand it over to Jeff Bandini from Niche Engineering.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for having us present to you this evening. Again, Jeff Bandini, Senior Project Manager with Niche Engineering. I have two esteemed colleagues with me this afternoon to share some of the great feedback that we've received from the Niche team, Maddie Augustine, who is a transportation engineer in our group, and Sydney Picard, who is one of our water resources design engineers. And also Lydia Cook, Senior Associate from Reed Hildebrand, who we mentioned as part of the advisory role based on her experience in the Franklin Park Action Plan. So I'm going to share with you, next slide, please, some of our goals that we are available to achieve on this project. Predominantly to promote pedestrian and bicyclist safety, to slow vehicle speeds along Circuit Drive, to improve some of the drainage and stormwater management, implement some of the low-cost recommendations from the action plan. That's where Lydia's slides mostly concentrate. And to Amy's point about some of the initial outreach goals is to promote Franklin Park as a destination instead of having Circuit Drive be more of a travel thoroughfare. And we will present some of our information from some of the materials that we've gathered in sort of our project introduction phase that we'll share with you this evening. And just one note that came as part of a potential result of the action plan was discussing potentially closing Circuit Drive entirely to automobile traffic. As far as the initial scope of this phase, that was not being considered. Mostly our goals are to present sort of the low cost, very easy implementable solutions to address some of the concerns that we'll share with you this evening. Next slide, please. So Lydia from Reed Hildebrand is going to discuss some of the, a little bit of a recap from the action plan and how some of those next steps and implementation will be addressed as part of this scope of this project.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. My name is Lydia Cook, and I'm a landscape architect with Reed Hildebrand. Our office led the design team for the Franklin Park Action Plan. Today, I'm going to share a little bit of context and background, both on the park's history and evolution, and also the analysis, high-level goals, and recommendations from the action plan related to Circuit Drive specifically to help set the stage for our meeting and conversation tonight. Next slide. Many of you are familiar with and participated in the Franklin Park Action Plan process, but for those of you who did not, the action plan was completed in 2022 in collaboration with Boston Parks and Recreation Department, the Franklin Park Coalition, and other park stakeholders, as well as the local community, to produce a strategic vision to guide investment in Franklin Park over the next 20 to 30 years. Its proposals in this plan respond to changes that have taken place in the park over its 120-year plus history, but also seek to meet this moment in time. They advocate for thoughtfully guided, community-driven improvements that are grounded in a deep understanding of the park's historic fabric, its ecological systems, and that those recommendations are implemented through continued dedicated investment so the park can do what it does today, but better. It's this work and many decades of the community advocacy for this park that sets the stage and the context for our continued conversation tonight. Next slide. During the action plan process, community themes and priorities were identified and structured into 4 overarching big ideas. And in the document, if you've taken time to review it, these ideas were further developed and refined into 5 primary action plan recommendations for the future of the park. And those are on the screen here. For tonight's conversation, the most pertinent one is clarify movement. This recommendation encapsulates goals that are supporting multimodal movement in the park, safety for bikes, pedestrians, and vehicles, improved access to the park's resources, and enhanced performance of its ecological systems, which in this case includes stormwater management and drainage. All of these goals relate to an improved experience along Circuit Drive. Next slide. So let's quickly look back to understand how the park evolved to what we know and experience along Circuit Drive today. After what we know as Franklin Park transitioned from agricultural homesteads and farm roads to a public park that was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, the original Circuit Loop, as well as the Playstead Loop and other primary paths through the wilderness, those were designed for moving around the park via horse and carriage, and Glen Road was intended for city through traffic. The park's circulation in that original design was responsive to site conditions. It was bending around existing pudding stone rock outcrops and featured cinematic views of the park's landscape as it moved between woodlands and open meadow. As time went on and cars replaced travel by horse and carriage, a new through road known today as Circuit Drive was implemented. This is the north half of what you know today as the Circuit Loop. And this became the route for cars to move through the park. Circuit Drive's alignment was widened and straightened over time to accommodate car travel, and that resulted in movement of vehicles at faster speeds. By the 60s and 70s, cars had encroached further into the park, and their access extended around the Playstead and the full Circuit Loop. And without barriers in place, cars were able to access areas that were really just intended for park goers and pedestrians. But in the early 1980s, a grassroots effort led by the Franklin Park Coalition and other advocates in the community led to an installation of the stone block barriers that you see in the park today that were intended to keep cars out of the interior of the park and off of park paths. Next slide. So in the more recent past, the southern portion of the Circuit Loop has been returned to a pedestrian and bike path. And today, cars in the city bus are still a very important part of how people move through the park and reach their destinations, whether that's Playstead, Ellicott Dale, the zoo, or the golf course. Next slide. But we also know from our engagement in the action plan process that Circuit Drive is really not just about cars, it's more than that. This is also including pedestrian paths that are highly used as a destination, drawing neighbors of all ages and from all directions for biking, walking, recreation, and community events. Next slide. But there are some challenges associated with the drive today, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. There are areas of unclear or insufficient path and bike infrastructure, few designated crossings, and the fast traffic along the drive, which all can create conflicts between pedestrians and bikes and cars and parking areas. Next slide. There's also several confusing intersections along the way that leave pedestrians and cyclists vulnerable and feeling unsafe. So really improving these pedestrian connections across and along the road, especially in these intersections, can enhance visitor arrival, circulation, and safety. Next slide. So while the action plan did look at proposals related to the comprehensive circulation system in the park, and some of those were quite long-term and ambitious, it also included several immediate recommendations or make-safe improvements for Circuit Drive in particular. So we'll talk about some of those. Next slide. Those included implementing immediate changes to improve safety for bikes and pedestrians along Circuit Drive, including adding crosswalks at key locations, considering traffic calming measures at key crossings to prioritize pedestrian safety, providing a designated and continuous bike lane along the drive, maintaining critical bus stops to ensure access for all park users is maintained, collecting updated traffic counts, which Maddie will talk about, and continuing coordination with the city agencies that Amy mentioned at the beginning, including the Boston Transportation Department. Next slide. The action plan also included a kind of high-level inventory of drainage challenges in the park. Today, the park suffers from an aging and undersized pipe drainage infrastructure, which often causes localized flooding and other issues. And a major factor in the declining water quality of Scarborough Pond is due to polluted runoff from Circuit Drive and the parking areas along it. So this runoff is carrying debris and other pollutants that discharge directly into the pond or the city's drainage system and impact water quality both within the park, but also can cause flooding downstream of the park itself. Next slide. So as we know, the health and resilience of the park's hydrology really goes hand in hand with the function of the park's above ground and below ground drainage systems and offers opportunities for on-site green stormwater management. And as it relates to Circuit Drive and the areas adjacent to it, the action plan identified 2 very high-level strategies that can be considered, and Sydney will talk a little bit more in depth about this, but the action plan identified hold and release. This is an idea around using areas like parking to slow and hold peak stormwater runoff during storms by detaining water and slowly releasing it back into the piped system. And then slow and clean is using Circuit Drive as an opportunity to intercept runoff before it reaches the golf course by rerouting it through vegetated swales, through curb cuts to filter and slow water before it enters that pipe system. So I will now turn it over to Maddie to talk a little bit more about the transportation analysis findings.
Thanks, Lydia. So I'm Maddie Augustine. I work for Niche Engineering as a transportation engineer, and I'm going to be running through some of the observations we've made about the transportation side of Circuit Drive. And then we'll look at some prospective strategies as well for possible solutions. So Franklin Park and Circuit Drive itself are situated within a broader network of parks, including the Arboretum as part of the Emerald Necklace, Southwest Corridor, and Circuit Drive provides connections both to and through Franklin Park between the Roxbury, Dorchester, Jamaica Plain, Mattapan neighborhoods. Within Franklin Park, there's an existing network of shared use paths and trails, as well as on-street bike lanes in some locations and vehicle lanes and parking areas. All types of roadway users use Circuit Drive to access Franklin Park and the surrounding neighborhoods, and buses also utilize Circuit Drive, particularly MBTA Route 16, which stops at Peabody Circle, Valley Gates, Shattuck Hospital, Morton Street. Looking at crossing the street as a pedestrian, it can be relatively challenging due to the wide roadway and high traffic speeds, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specific speeds later. But there are several locations where a pedestrian may want to cross the street despite a lack of formalized crossing, such as by Schoolmaster Hill and the Wilderness. Looking at where there are marked crossings, these are often very long and leave pedestrians exposed to traffic for a long time as they take over 50 feet just to cross 2 vehicle lanes of moving traffic. While there are existing shared use paths and other walkways through the park, there are also a lot of areas where pedestrians are walking along desire lines where, despite a lack of pavement, there's some worn areas where people walking is wearing away plants that hold soil into place. These worn areas raise safety and accessibility concerns. And one of our theories is that pedestrians end up stuck alongside one side of the roadway as they try to cross, but are unable to. If you're on a bike through going along Circuit Drive, the bike lanes are inconsistent or sometimes impacted by sediment erosion or a curb, a catch basin that has settled. Bike lanes appear to veer in different directions or they disappear through intersections. So this highlights a little bit of where we would expect to see some of that bike infrastructure. Some of the erosion that we saw in the bike infrastructure is also present and impacts accessibility of bus stops. There are sediment impacts near the Shattuck Hospital bus stop, and close to Valley Gates, there's no clear location for bus riders to wait, board, or alight the bus. If you're a driver, there's also some confusing expectations. There's a lack of wayfinding to zoo parking lots, and there's dual signals at Peabody Circle, which may encourage drivers to speed up and beat the light rather than slowing down to enjoy the park atmosphere. There's some signage without corresponding crosswalks, which just leads to some confusion as well. The wide pavement widths and long straightaways also allow for high speeds. So the road geometry is making it comfortable for drivers to feel comfortable to go fast. We see long straightaways near the golf course and Schoolmaster Hill and wide turning radii and long crossings. Wide pavement also means more stormwater runoff, which again, Sydney will talk about, but there are opportunities for us to use some transportation solutions and create space for some green infrastructure as well. Looking at the quantitative side of all of this, we collected traffic data on a consecutive Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in March. The vehicles per day that we see is pretty typical of a Boston roadway, which does imply that people are using this for Circuit Drive as part of a broader transportation network rather than specifically to access Franklin Park. These vehicle volumes of about 14,000 vehicles per day correspond to a vehicle arriving at a given spot every 3 to 4 seconds, give or take. Some of this is also comes in platoons or waves of cars, which only exacerbates the difficulties crossing the street. We also looked at the traffic speeds. The speed limit along Circuit Drive is 25 miles per hour, but the average directional speed over 24 hours is closer to 35 miles per hour. And higher speeds are less safe for people outside of cars. There's a significant increase in the likelihood of a serious injury at higher speeds, like 35 miles per hour. So we have a couple strategies that we are thinking about implementing that Boston Transportation has used as part of a first step in a multi-step project to make Circuit Drive more comfortable. So the Boston Transportation Department looks at safer crossings, safer speeds, and safer turns. So safer crossings include everything you see here. And then safer turns looks at curb extensions and tightening up turning radii through slow turn wedges and teeing off intersections. And you can see in the curb extension and T intersection that there is now space for green infrastructure and stormwater solutions. Safer speeds look like some speed humps and cushions, which you probably have seen throughout the city at this point, as well as road right sizing and speed feedback signs. Looking at what other places in Boston are doing to implement some traffic calming, there's a new raised crossing along the Emerald Necklace, and the Arboretum is installing some entrance improvements as well. Other cities are working on traffic calming within their parks as well. San Francisco and Chicago and New York are all looking to install infrastructure that make their parks more comfortable places to be. So looking at stormwater, Sydney will take us through that.
Thank you, Maddie. So just to introduce the broader idea of stormwater, it's rainfall that hits a surface, whether it be pervious or impervious. Pervious includes any of your natural surfaces, including like the woods, landscaped areas like the golf course here, and impervious surfaces include the roadway, sidewalks, roof, places where the rainfall and stormwater is going to hit it and then run off and collect into a drainage system. Conditions contributing to stormwater will increase in the future with climate change, including more intense and frequent rainstorms. With that, we need to plan for the future of stormwater and how to manage it along Circuit Drive. Next slide, please. So there are 3 major low points along Circuit Drive where water will run off of the high points and collect in these lower points. If the drainage infrastructure is under capacity, there's too much stormwater for it to be able to manage, that's where it will collect and start ponding and flooding either the roadway, walkways, and it can impede traffic flow as well as pedestrian access and safety throughout the site. I know that there's been instances where Circuit Drive has actually been closed due to flooding. Along these 3 points is where you're going to see most of the stormwater flooding. And on the next slide, you'll see that in the past there has been flooding in these areas, and these are some photos evident of that. On the left side here, we have a photo of flooding at the bus stop that's right in front of the Shattuck Hospital. This is a large area that actually we also have a video of cars just swerving into the other lane to get around this large area of ponding, which again is unsafe. And then we also have the Valley Gates parking lot just south of the Wilderness area that floods because it's near a low point, and the soils are compacted, so it's hard for water to infiltrate here. And then the major low point where you'll see a lot of flooding that causes the Circuit Drive to be closed is just kind of northeast of the golf course there. This area is where a lot of drainage comes to connect. There's undersized and aging drainage infrastructure here that causes it to be under capacity, that can't convey the stormwater away from this site. And then over to the right, you'll see flooding that's happening at the golf course parking lot as well. That's under capacity pipes that can't handle the amount of stormwater running off of these impervious surfaces. And then in the next slide, you will see the different watersheds. So this is just showing you the area that's contributing to Circuit Drive through stormwater. This is the topographic area that's draining to Circuit Drive. So here you'll see it's not just Circuit Drive, it's a lot of off-site area. It is a lot of area for these pipes that are at the current sizes they are undersized to be able to handle it. This, like I said, can contribute to those major flooding issues you have where it's causing drive closures and issues for traffic flow and pedestrian flow. Though we can help fix this with implementing green infrastructure to help hold back the stormwater, infiltrate as much as we can to reduce the volume of stormwater and to treat it before we release it back into, overflow it back into the drainage infrastructure. Next slide. Some challenges that we are witnessing during our site visit that contribute not just the aging and undersized drainage infrastructure, but they contribute to the flooding is erosion and compaction in isolated low points. So on the left side, top left, you can see pedestrian compaction. This is where pedestrians without proper sidewalks, without other access, they're creating their own paths and then they're compacting the soils, which then prohibits plant growth and causes erosion where you'll have sediments and soils running off within the stormwater, and those get carried into the drainage infrastructure and they can clog catch basins, they can clog pipes, and that reduces the capacity of the drainage infrastructure to convey stormwater away from the site as well. On the bottom left, you'll also see areas where if there's not curbing, vehicles will pull off. That'll also cause compaction of the soils and erosion and large areas of sediment collection that then get carried eventually into the stormwater system. The picture on the top right is an isolated low point. This is due again to compaction over time. This is not a design flaw of the roadway. This is just over time, the bus continuously pulls into this spot, so the tire ruts have caused the pavement to settle. It then creates a little ponding area where water collects, and you can't see it in this picture, but at the very top of that ponding, there is a catch basin, but because it's depressed, it can't quite reach the catch basin. So the only other way for this water to escape is to evaporate over time throughout in the air. And then the catch basin on the bottom right is a clogged catch basin. Yeah, that's fine, Maddie. You can go to the next slide. This is just highlighting the areas that I'm describing here. So it's a clogged catch basin. There is a catch basin at the bottom of that ponding. This could be due to carried sediments. It could be due to just an overtaxed and undersized drainage infrastructure here. Next slide. Okay, so there's a couple different options we can use here that are sensitive to Circuit Drive's context to help manage stormwater and reduce flooding. A larger infiltration basin, which is right at the top here, which is just a large depressed area in a landscape area that can collect stormwater and where it's allowed to infiltrate into the ground naturally. That has an overflow. So once it fills up to this overflow, it'll drain out into the drainage infrastructure. But otherwise, any other water that enters it will be allowed to infiltrate into the soils, be treated by the soils, improve removal of the nutrients within those soils and the water quality before it's released into the stormwater drainage infrastructure. Another strategy that we could use are bioretention, and these are a little bit smaller areas, landscaped areas. You'll see like flowers in these areas, different plants, native species that we can put next to paved areas. We can put these next to sidewalks, the roadway. We can kind of sprinkle these smaller interventions throughout to help manage stormwater throughout the site and reduce those ponding zones. Next slide. Okay, so we would love to hear your input and thoughts, and I've seen the chat going crazy, so we love to see that. So now's an opportunity for you guys to share your thoughts on Circuit Drive. How do you use it? Anything you want to share about Circuit Drive. So I see a hand up, and I'm going to call on Dorothy to unmute and share your thoughts. Oh, hold on. Can we unmute Dorothy for her, or?
Before
yeah,
we do that, I think
Yeah.
Amy is going to run point
Perfect.
on addressing some of the comments, because I don't know if that's going to be directly from the chat or from some of the people waiting patiently that have listened to us for the last half an hour or so. So I suspect that folks from Niche and Lydia from Reed Hildebrand will be available to answer questions. But Amy, I think you're going to take the lead on addressing the comments, correct?
sure, we can start.
Okay.
I mean,
You want me to summarize? I've been taking notes, and do you want me to summarize what is in there and then hand off some of the questions to you? Would that be helpful?
sure, that'd be great.
Okay, so a lot of what we heard were concerns about the safety and the traffic. We heard a lot of people giving stories about, close calls that they've had. Seems to be pretty consistent that, a lot of people have seen this. There's concerns, especially about children and the inability of local school children to be able to walk or bike through the park safely to schools. People saying that they feel like they've seen a lot of higher speeds than what we were seeing in the averages. And so that was a lot of the consistency there. And then there were a couple of questions. One was about why Friday was selected because it's typically a lower volume day of traffic. And we can get back to these. There was also the timing of when these improvements would happen. That the note that public transportation needs to be better, and the concern that a lot of the compaction is due to people parking where they shouldn't. So that's kind of my summary of what was in there. So I don't know if we want to try to address those few questions before we open it up to the public.
Hi,
Yeah, I
Lon.
wonder, Jeff, do you want to talk about the traffic count process?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to hop in and chime in with that. That's a great question, by
Thanks,
the
Jeff.
way. And thank you for the question. So as part of the data collection effort, we selected, what we like to call average or typical conditions, right? So we looked at the Franklin Park calendar to make sure that we weren't scheduling traffic counts during some event that was going to either spike or depress the traffic numbers. We wanted to have something that was reasonable and accurate. And that's the same for this project or any others, but given the complexity with the amount of events and things like that, we aim to choose a representative week. We chose it, I believe it was in March, so we wanted to purposely wait until after the winter when the park was able to see some activity. Again, given the overall timeline of this project, we certainly didn't want to, wait until, this time of year to take counts where they might actually be a little bit higher. But just understanding the complexity with the traffic data collection, we collected from a 72 hours continuous count for the daily traffic volumes. So that's the vehicles per day that Maddie shared in her slide. So Maddie, maybe if you're still running point on this, if you want to go back to that slide to provide a little bit more context. But as far as the volumes itself, so we looked at a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and most of these, the data collection between the 3 days was actually fairly consistent, which again, based on your question, would lend to believe that Fridays are typically lower. Given the recreational, use of this site, the thought process here is that Fridays are typically slower on an average Boston street due to people working from home and taking vacations and things like that. For use such as this, sort of the theory that, vehicles and travelers will find sort of the fastest path, right? If it's a Friday and, it's a good day to go golfing, or it's a good day to go for a walk before you, go home to work from home, or if it's a day where, you travel through the park because you believe that can be your fastest destination, because all other days of the week, as you suggested, might actually be higher traveled. So it's all kind of this like balancing system in terms of like Thursday, Friday, Saturday being the higher day. As far as the speed goes, and Maddie alluded to this a little bit as well, as far as the speed goes, we actually, when we were out there observing the site, saw several platoons of vehicles coming through the park, right? So you don't necessarily see a 45-mile-an-hour vehicle every once in a while. On either end of the park entrance are signalized, so you tend to see groups of, anywhere between 3 and 10 vehicles entering the park at any given time. So in actuality, what that does is two things. It creates a platooning effect, right? So the vehicles really can only travel as fast as that first vehicle. So if that first vehicle isn't traveling fast enough, all vehicles behind it will sort of travel slower. And I think one of the comments actually said, when a vehicle stops and slows down, sometimes there isn't a reasoning behind why that happens. So a vehicle may tend to go around or try to pass it or something like that. And again, these are average speeds. That's not to say that there aren't people traveling faster than what we're showing here, but it also means that there are some people, granted not all, that are traveling a little bit slower, whether they're slowing down to take a turn into the hospital, if they're slowing to take a turn into the Valley Gates, into the golf course, or if they actually are slowing down for a pedestrian waiting in a crosswalk. We see that as a good sign. So we certainly do understand there could be some vehicles traveling faster than 35. Again, part of the short and long-term goals of this project is to slow down vehicles. Maddie did share a slide that, we understand the complexity in with vehicles traveling faster as that relates to pedestrian and bicycle traffic. So that's part of what the next step in this process would be, was understanding how to mitigate some of the concerns that we outlined for you this evening.
Thanks, Jeff. I think we'll let Dorothy ask her question. I know you've had your hand up for a while. Michael, are you able to unmute her or?
Okay, so so clearly that there is a need for safety improvements, and I think your timeline is great. To think that within a year, this time next year, you're going to be just about finishing up the project. What I'm wondering, and maybe someone from BTD, if they're on the call, could answer, is knowing that we need interventions now, is there a world where there are any temporary interventions that could be put into place? And the reason why I ask is because temporary interventions are already what the city does with all of the bollards. The bollards are not things that are supposed to be permanent. They're a part of the journey towards a better network of safety corridors. If I heard correctly, construction is not happening anyway until next year. And I know that there could be other things that you might be digging up and this could impact something else, but could someone help me understand what barriers there might be to any kind of safety measures that could be put into place that could just help conditions now? Because I think if anything, it could be a part of their work that's helping bring people to Franklin Park. Because living across the street from this, anecdotally, I'm watching the numbers of foot traffic just like increase. I mean, it's amazing to see all of the folks who are coming to the park, and I think this is part of it. And the great, let me move arms here because all my children are coming home now. But this is the time, especially for folks who are on bike, they're coming back to it. So if there are certain things that you do want to learn, thank you, 1 second. This is the time of year to learn it. Like there could be an opportunity to learn things about travel behavior. 1 second, please. Apologies. This could be a really great opportunity to learn about travel behavior through Franklin Park. So it would be great if there could be some quick build solutions that also make the park safe. Thank you. And someone could just mute me again.
Thanks, Dorothy. That's great feedback.
Did you want me to take that, Amy?
Sure. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on that.
No,
Yes.
that's outstanding feedback. And had that comment come out a few months ago, I would say there are some implementation devices that can be used on a temporary basis. But I know recently the city has started reevaluating some of the infrastructure and what they deem to be appropriate temporary measures. So, and we did discuss some of these measures with BTD throughout this sort of initial process, and a lot of those slides came from BTD's safety toolkit, which you can find online. To answer your question, we want to make sure that what we're implementing here is going to be not necessarily a permanent solution, but one that's going to be effective. We don't want to put in something that we think is going to be counterintuitive to the long-term goals. If there was something that we could do in the short term, I would say we would have that discussion. But again, with all of the different pieces of feedback and all of the different issues and considerations, it's not just slowing vehicles, right? It's providing, better crossings, and with that comes, making sure that those crossings are up to standards, right? Or the sight distance is appropriate. Are they accessible for all users? So basically what we don't want to do is put something in that gives some sort of false sense of security beyond what we deem to be an appropriate sort of short and long-term solution.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. All right, Stephen, are you able to unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So I had two questions if you have the time. The first was, it was alluded to at the beginning of the presentation that there was a plan put forward 4 or 5 years ago to fully pedestrianize the road. That seems in a lot of ways like it would be simpler and cheaper to me. It would take very little to put up a few bollards to block traffic or a gate. It wouldn't require mode separation in the park. You talked about runoff issues. That would greatly reduce the pollution coming from motor vehicle tires, particulates. And it would be safer, as people have mentioned. It's a very dangerous place. It's a place we don't feel comfortable crossing with our 9-month-old. So I was just curious why that plan was no longer under consideration.
I mean, these tools that we're utilizing now are really sort of a short-term fix, something that we think we can do fairly easily, in the short term. I think, and Lauren, I don't know if you want to sort of weigh in on that vision in the action plan around closing it, but I
Yeah.
think there's maybe some challenges there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to give a little bit of context. I know that during the action plan, it was one of the options that was proposed, and there was never a plan that said we're definitely going to close this. It was sort of there's like multiple ends of a spectrum of what kinds of improvements could happen or what kinds of changes could happen on Circuit Drive. And that was sort of one end of the spectrum. And we had some people who were very in favor of it, like yourself, who thought this was a great idea, being able to reconnect the park from safety purposes. We also had a lot of people that were very against it and very, very upset about it. Things that, you know, how can people with disabilities or older people get into park to be able to get into the center of the park? So we've heard a lot of comments on both ends of that that challenge. And so one of the things that the master plan or the action plan talked about was sort of stepping stones. And there are multiple different iterations of what this could be now and in the future. And so right now, like Amy said, we're looking at the immediate safety concerns, because something, and you said, you know, you could sit here and say, let's put bollards up, and it sounds very simple, but it's really not, right? How do people get to the Shattuck? How do people get into the zoo? How do emergency vehicles access it? The bus with MBTA? There's a lot of things that go into it. So it's not quite as easy as it would seem to just make that decision. Plus, there's really a big divide in the community. So I hope that helps answer that question a little bit.
I mean, not really. I mean, those things always come up, and you know, the fact is they're safer and it makes the parks nicer, and it's been extremely successful in other places. But you know, I don't want to. I know there's limited time here, so the other question I had, if you have the time, you know, if with the plan that's going ahead, I know you know they mentioned that there's been some kind of guidance changes with BTD and how infrastructure is being built. So I was just wondering if there was any commitment for when bike lanes do get developed in this park. Will they go in with permanent protected concrete infrastructure, or grade separated bike lanes to protect cyclists and pedestrians?
That is
Yeah, I
something.
mean, I think that.
Good,
Sorry,
Amy.
Jeff, you go. No, you go.
We all have lots of ideas. That is something that we're definitely considering. Again, there are limitations to how that can be constructed in terms of like BTD standards, in terms of width and separation and constructability. You know, as we mentioned, some of the impervious area is part of our challenge on this project too. So if you start talking about creating additional impervious area via widening or extra concrete where there's some grassy areas now, it starts to complicate things in terms of the stormwater runoff. So yes, those are under consideration, but we need to evaluate that further as part of the next phase of the project.
And I'm just going to jump in really quickly. One of the other things with that, in terms of that space needs across that width of the space that we currently have, there are a lot of really large existing mature trees on both sides of the roadway. So that width that we have to work within is also something that we need to think through as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know you know it was discussed that the roadway is quite wide right now, and that's you know been an issue with the crosswalks. Where in particular would be an issue for narrowing the amount of space for drivers and using that regained space for protected bike lanes? I mean, they only have to be a couple feet wide.
Again, it's certainly on the table. Again, you know, the width varies in some spaces. You know, Maddie showed that one slide where the bike lane was fairly large when you enter towards the golf course in the southbound direction. The Valley Gates section, you know, due to its geometry, obviously a very wide sort of triangle piece there. And to Lauren's point, when we were out in the field looking at that, there are a few trees within that triangular space. So sort of implementing things like teeing off Valley Gates or roadway narrowing or things like that do have some challenges. So that's certainly on the table, but we need to look into it a little bit further.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the
Thanks,
question.
Stephen. All right, Kenya, are you able to unmute? There we go.
Yes, thank you. I'll be really quick. So 3 quick comments I think I have. One, I do not think that closing off Circuit Drive is the solution here. I think with some enforcement, hopefully, you know, things would change. I do believe that in the city of Boston, on a lot of our streets here, whether state or city managed or owned, we have a people problem with driving. And I think there needs to be a mindset around that needs to change. We're doing a lot of fixing and a lot of redesigns and things like that. And I'm not necessarily convinced that that is the solution. We have a people problem behind the wheel, and we have a lot of drivers who are driving vehicles in this city. And so I think enforcement should really be looked at. That's one. Secondly, Franklin Park and all of its park, Playstead and the Elma Lewis Playhouse, they have a plethora of events every year, and they bring out a lot of people. You got the Kite Festival, you have BAMS Fest, you have the concert series. I mean, just a lot going on, right? And so I guess I'm kind of wondering, is there a plan, or has there been any, and I'm not saying this should happen. I'm asking the question because I really don't know. Is there a plan to cut off parking altogether in and around Franklin Park, specifically Circuit Drive as well? That's the second thing. And the third thing is I also work for the planning department for the city. I'm one of the community engagement managers there. And so what I would also encourage you, I don't know if this is the only meeting, maybe you have other series of meetings coming up down the line, but I am not entirely looking at the number of 67 people on this call, including folks who are hosting this meeting. I would encourage you to do additional outreach, especially around the Dorchester, Roxbury end, to make sure there's representation that surrounds Circuit Drive in this meeting as well. And that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Kenya.
So the question around the parking.
Yeah, so that one I would say parking isn't part of this particular project, but we know it'll probably warrant some additional study. And related to events in particular, the city is actually soliciting a new vendor to manage the parking app system. So in this kind of unique case, there would be particularly for the soccer game days, there would be codes used for certain park users for to have more flexible parking options, or potentially time limits in certain areas, but it's not fully fleshed out at this point. But I think that will certainly be studied in more detail. But I think on special events days, it is tricky, those ones outside of this, the future soccer games, because I think it does get certainly overrun, and that's where I think the parking occurs in spaces that aren't intended to be parking. So certainly could use a little bit more control, I think, in that regard. Does that answer your question? You were wondering if there was going to be no parking allowed? Is that what?
Yeah, and I wasn't so much worried about White Stadium because White Stadium has its own problems, right? And they're still going through their own transportation parking plan and whatnot. And trust me, I've been in meetings before it even went public, so I'm very well aware of what's happening over there. I guess I was more concerned about kind of the more summer things that are happening now, like BAMS Fest is coming in June. You have the Elma Lewis concert series that's going to happen in July. People come out in droves for these events, and oftentimes they do park on Circuit Drive for these events. We have the Boston Carnival, the Caribbean Carnival that happens right in Peabody Circle. They also park on Circuit Drive. Kite Festival, same thing. So I guess I'm wondering. And it may not be a conversation. It may not have happened yet. I'm just wondering if that's something the city or state are thinking about doing. I hope not, but
Can I jump in really quickly? I don't think any of our proposals are taking parking away. That's not what this project is about. We're not necessarily talking about redesigning it or what the future of parking is here, but the only thing that we're talking about, there might be a space or two that in order to put in raised crosswalks or to be able to do some of the traffic calming that we're doing. But no, right now, there's nothing on the table that says take parking off of Circuit Drive.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Lauren, for saying that more succinctly, clearly. And thanks, Kenya, for those comments. All right, Zach, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I think we bike through Franklin Park twice a day because one of our kids goes to school in JP and one of our kids goes to school in Roxbury. and it's more pleasant to bike through the park as opposed to like going through Eggleston Square, which has its own, challenges. But that crossing there at Schoolmaster Hill is just, yeah, it would love, to Dorothy's comment about timeline, just anything that can, because the crosswalk is just not respected. We'll be standing in the road with our children, and it takes like 4 or 5, sometimes 6 vehicles to stop, and even then one will stop on one side, but then in the other direction people are not. So I mean, I know this is a known problem, but just it is a, then that's why I think the idea of like the flashing beacons, while I guess they can't hurt. We also use those to cross the Columbus Ave near the Eggleston Square Library, and a lot of drivers just do not respect the flashing lights. They just so I think that yes, definitely waving your hands above your head is helpful sometimes. But I think anything that actually physically slows cars down, I think on our end would be preferred over visual cues that encourage people to slow down, because it just, for every driver that it works for, there's 6 or 7 that it won't. Yeah, I think and yeah, that's the main thing is we're looking forward to the improvements and being able to get through the park more safely while getting from JP to Roxbury. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Zach. That's helpful to hear about your experience. Chris.
All right, thank you. One question and one comment. My comment is fully agree with the previous folks who said if we want to really protect pedestrians and bicyclists, fully agree, we need to close Circuit Drive to traffic. I think that is by far the most effective solution. And I struggle to think about a cost-effective way to slow traffic enough to make this road safe enough for cars and pedestrians and bicyclists. But absent that, my question is, and you've seen in the chat quite a few comments around raised crosswalks and speed humps. My understanding is the city will not install those on roads that are used by MBTA bus routes, which this is. So is that your understanding as well, or are there other options that we consider like that for Circuit Drive?
I'll take that.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff, you take that.
Maddie, if you don't mind going back to the slide that had the speed cushions on it. And that's an excellent question, by the way. One of the solutions that we presented from the BTD toolkit talks about speed cushions, which is essentially that's the picture on the top left there, that has the ability to slow drivers down in passenger vehicles, but would also allow buses and emergency vehicles to be able to pass at a normal speed. So basically what that does is it slows most drivers, but permits the ones that actually need to travel faster for those reasons. So again, not suggesting that we're going to, throw these down everywhere, but, pointed solutions around key areas. We do have a few stops, MBTA stops within the park itself. So that's something that we'll definitely look at. And I didn't get a chance to chime in about Zach's previous comment about the observation versus some of the geometrics. In the industry, we certainly have seen better success with more geometric modifications than we have with warning signs. And to your point, right, like the physical barrier of not being able to travel faster certainly is a more streamlined solution than just telling people to travel slower. And that's why we've, not considering it necessarily as part of this project, but we've seen successes in other projects as far as roundabouts go, because the geometrics simply don't permit fast travel just because of the physics of how it's actually designed. So that's a couple of thoughts on some of the toolkit items that we presented on this.
One of the other options, if I can jump in also, is speed tables, which are basically extended speed humps. This is something that BTD is exploring as well and is also on the table. It's something we're coordinating with the MBTA.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was a good comment because that has come up in our conversations with BTD. Lucas?
Hi, I had a question about potential plans for the bus stops, especially because you mentioned that there are areas of the park where widening of the impervious surfaces is not practical, or there might not be enough room for adequate pedestrian or cyclist paths and walkways. Has it been considered that buses might be able to, instead of pulling over to a stop, just stopping in the lane, which should reduce the amount of space the bus needs on the street. In addition, it would be able to just continue moving again once passengers have boarded or deboarded instead of having to wait to merge back into traffic.
We could certainly look at that as a solution. Again, you know, that's sort of counterintuitive to some degree, but I understand the point, right? Like, it's good to have a space for buses to pull off and let passengers board, you know, pretty streamlined. But again, you know, creating that sort of inherent way for vehicles to slow down, right? Like if you said, if a bus blocks a lane while passengers board, that inherently stops traffic for a certain amount of time. But again, to one of the comments that we've seen here, sometimes people don't understand why vehicles are stopping in the lane and might just go around them anyway. But again, looking into this in terms of like how that dovetails in with some of the challenges related to the impervious areas, right? Like there was the one bus stop near the hospital that has that sort of pavement rutting and pedestrian ramp washout. So that's part of what we'll look at is in terms of, you know, improving the accessibility for all users.
Yeah, just one thing about the cars passing people without knowing why they're stopped. I feel like this could probably be avoided with the bus stops, because if the bus stops in the lane and the curb is still close to the bus, there wouldn't be room to swerve around them. Because I only ever see that happening, and when I almost get hit when that happens is when the road is exceptionally wide, either because there is a space for the bus to pull over, or because or because there is street parking that is not actively occupied, and that's what gives people the room to swerve around. And if that wasn't there, then presumably that wouldn't be able to happen. Does that make sense?
No, that's a great point. We'll take that under consideration. And I know, as I mentioned, there's a couple of different stops here, so we'll certainly address how that fits into our overall project goals.
Thank you, Jeff.
You got it. Thank you.
All right, Alvin?
I'm opposed to closing Circuit Drive. Is that under consideration?
So that is not under consideration in this project. Really just focused on those kind of immediate safety issues, but we'll certainly keep track of these comments. And I think it's helpful to hear everyone's thoughts on it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey.
Hello, thank you. I was surprised to hear Lauren say that you're not looking at parking at all. It seems when there are events, there's a lot of overflow parking that parks on Circuit Drive. And if we're talking about bike lanes on Circuit Drive, that would take up space for some cars parked during events. And so potentially there would be some reduction in parking, but are you really not looking at parking at all on Circuit Drive? Because cars do park there at times.
Just to clarify, I wasn't saying we weren't looking at it as part of the project. I was saying we're not removing all of parking as part of this project. There will be potential shifts to it, but we're not looking at a wholesale removal. And like I was saying, there could be things where the parking shifts based on bump outs or crosswalks or other things that are needed because of it. And the bike lanes are part of that, but we're not looking at wholesale removing parking from Circuit Drive is what I'm saying as part of this project.
Right, but potentially—
Sorry if that wasn't clear.
Well, yes, no, potentially marking bike lanes through there. I mean, right now, they're sort of effective bike lanes with the wide shoulders. And if you make them marked bike lanes, that makes them no parking at all. it seems there could be a significant change in parking. I don't need to park there. It's not in my interest, but you said you're not trying to remove parking, but it seems potentially there could be a significant reduction in parking with adding bike lanes. I think that needs to be clear.
Well, there is a bike lane, right? A standard bike lane. So I mean, I think if there's changes to that width or buffer, it's potentially narrowing the travel lane. So I think it doesn't necessarily have to impact what's out there in terms of parking. But I think we'll certainly have to understand what is out there and how those sort of unauthorized parking spots are being used, because sometimes that does mean that someone is parking partially in the bike lane, and that's obviously a problem. So, we'd want to, be aware of that kind of issue.
Can anybody comment on just how much of Circuit Drive is used at peak events for parking?
Parking counts on event days.
Right, how much of Circuit Drive is used for parking when there are big events there?
That I don't know, but we could look into it.
I think that would be important.
And Amy, really quickly, I know we've got a couple of other hands raised, but I did want to check in on several things in the chat. If we could also maybe jump into a couple of those and then jump over to Marty. There were questions about whether we had data on the number of speeding tickets that were issued on Circuit Drive. And I don't that I know of, but I wanted to check to see if the design team had had those conversations with Boston Police, and if not, we could try to get that information to bring to the next meeting.
Yeah, I don't think we have that, but
Okay.
we can add BPD to our list of coordinating departments.
That would be great. And then there was another question about potential whether the summer shutdowns on some of the exterior roads was still going to happen this summer. And I don't know if, Amy, you've had any of those conversations, but I know that there have been city conversations with the Boston Police on whether that's been working or not. And so I don't know that any final decisions have been made, but I do know there are a lot of community members in those conversations, but we could try to find that out for the next meeting as well. And then the other thing that I just wanted to raise that came up where there were a lot of people talking about community engagement. And I know Kenya mentioned it, and Rep Holmes did in the chat as well, about, making sure that we're reaching out in the community. And we always, just so everybody knows, we always try to reach out to as many people as we can, flyering in the parks, reaching out to community groups, our community liaisons. The Franklin Park Coalition is incredible with helping us. But we know we can't get to everybody. So if there are things, and I loved that somebody put the Kite and Bike Festival in there, which is fantastic. But if there are specific places in the neighborhood that you feel like, man, everybody looks at flyers at, this restaurant or this cafe or this supermarket, please let us know, like reach out to Amy or put it in the chat, because we always want to expand that outreach and get as many people as we can. So any insight into some of those places that we're not currently reaching, maybe, please let us know, because we do really try to get that word out. So just wanted to throw those things out there, Amy, before we jumped over.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. That's helpful. And I think if we don't get to everything in the chat, there's quite a bit in there. We'll be exporting that from Zoom and making sure that we are tracking everything. So let's see, Marty, are you able to unmute?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I have a couple of a question, and then I think a couple of comments. My question is that you talked quite a lot about flooding, which I know from experience to be a problem in the park. And it seems as though you mentioned that the underlying problem, no pun intended, is that the pipes underneath the street and underneath the park are old and inadequately sized for the needs of today. And that's why we see this flooding. But you don't seem to have that on the table as part of the solution. And it seems as though the solutions you're proposing are not so much solutions of the problem, but ways to work around the problem, which is the size of the pipes. So that is the question I have. And then comment, it isn't just on event days that Circuit Drive gets used for parking. It's also for the zoo and for the golf course. It happens all the time. If you closed Circuit Drive, by the way, I don't know how golfers would be getting to the golf course because they're certainly not going to carry their golf clubs with them. But when you have, particularly this time of year, you're going to have a huge influx of school buses from every community from here to the Berkshires, I think, coming to Franklin Park. They do field trips. So they park. So parking is an issue. The third comment is that, you know, while bike lanes may be controversial in around the city, we should absolutely be able to bike safely through Franklin Park. It's a park and people should be able to walk around safely. So I'm glad that you're paying attention to this for people who are doing that. It's important.
Thanks, Marty. Sydney, I don't know if you want to talk to the flooding question, but I will say we're still working to sort of understand the details of the drainage system that's out there. So that potentially is a little bit of a wild card in terms of the solution, but we do know that there's value in green infrastructure in terms of you know, cleaning some of that runoff before it does get to the pond. So that's sort of, I think it could potentially be kind of a dual or like a two-pronged solution if needed. But Sydney, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah. So with the way that stormwater was previously originally designed is you have a catch basin, an inlet, opportunity for stormwater to enter the drainage infrastructure through a catch basin or an area drain, and then it's taken away off-site through pipes. There's catch basins provide a little bit of treatment with their sump. They allow settlement soils and sediments to settle and get removed before it travels downstream through the pipe. It doesn't really provide any more water quality treatment than that. If there's more finer bacteria or finer sediments and pollutants within the water, there's not really any treatment in our current traditional stormwater design. So with green infrastructure, we're providing a more sustainable approach to managing stormwater. It allows stormwater to naturally infiltrate through the soils and get treated naturally through the microbiome within the soils and the plants so it'll reduce the water volume going into the stormwater system, and it'll also increase the water quality of the stormwater through natural filtration in the soils and plants. So green infrastructure is a way to kind of not have to touch the drainage. I'm not saying that the drain lines won't need to be upgraded maybe in the future, but it does give us a workaround in the nearer term to be able to manage our stormwater more sustainably and allow to reduce that stormwater volume and to increase the water quality before it is released into those pipes that go directly to Scarborough Pond or directly to another waterway. Does that kind of answer your question on the stormwater, Marty?
Well, yes and no. First of all, I would think that there would be a way to direct drainage other than to Scarborough Pond. And secondly, of course, I'm thinking about the current plan to bring 11,000 soccer fans into the stadium, into White Stadium, all through the summer, which is allegedly going to happen before this project is finished. And that is going to hugely tax the drainage system in the park. So I have no idea how it's all connected, but it would be very interesting to see how it's all connected and who owns it. Is it Boston Water and Sewer? Is it the city of Boston? Who is it that's responsible for it?
That would be Parks. Actually, this drainage infrastructure connects to water and sewer infrastructure once it leaves the park.
Okay, so it's the city.
Yeah.
Could I chime in there too, Amy? I had a
Oh,
thought
yeah.
as we were discussing this, and we meant to address this earlier, is that I know Maddie and Sydney from the niche team presented their slides separately, but there is opportunity for us to integrate both transportation and green infrastructure improvements simultaneously. One of the solutions that Maddie presented in that little animation, and I wasn't sure how many folks were able to catch that. Maddie, if you could go back to that slide that talks about
The
teeing
T
off
intersection.
some of the intersections. So this particular example doesn't show it, but when you create a intersection in sort of the before image there, what you see is sort of this sort of acute skew intersection. And by teeing off an intersection, there's opportunity to reclaim the space provided by the T as green infrastructure or pervious area to accompany that that improvement. So as we go through a lot of these potential improvements that are included in this toolkit, there's certainly opportunities to provide sort of simultaneous pedestrian and green infrastructure as part of our solutions.
I also want to maybe just jump right back to the stormwater question real quick to answer, Marty, your question about directing stormwater somewhere else other than Scarborough Pond. Stormwater will infiltrate in our pervious surfaces where it can, but there is a point where the soils will become oversaturated, and that's where it starts to pond. You can't get any more infiltration out of the land. So for stormwater to be carried off-site, that's where we have introduced the drainage infrastructure, and those outfall to surface waters. If it's not Scarborough Pond, not for this site, it's Charles River. It's different surface waters that it'll eventually need to enter into to be carried away from the site.
Great, thanks, Sydney. Let's see, Darian, are you able to unmute?
I think I am. Thank you. So I know that I asked this question. Someone else asked something very similar in the chat a few minutes later. So I just want to make sure that that like it gets addressed. If we can go back to the traffic portion, one of the options that was raised was the middle island, like the middle lane island. We have examples of it on Columbus Ave. I think that like I bike, I walk, I drive, I do all the things, and I think that yeah, the crossing island. I think that like narrows streets significantly. And I think that just by narrowing a street, if you look at the Columbus Ave, like changes that they if you look at the Columbus Ave changes that they made, I think that like because the driving path is a lot more narrow, cars naturally need to move a little bit more slower, otherwise they end up getting hurt. I think that if we can consider that as an option, I think that like some of these other things might not be as necessary. Not saying that we won't need them, but it would make it also safer because I've lived in the area for a while, and I've seen some people that move at various speeds while walking across the street. It's a very, very wide street. So I think something like that would be nice to consider.
Yeah, that's a great comment. No, I think it kind of has the dual purpose too of calming traffic and also giving pedestrians that refuge. So,
but like if we go back to the last slide that we that you all keep going back to at the end, yeah, like I think that we've gone over the fact that there are some number of like informal pathways that people like to take. So if you look along the like side of Franklin Park Zoo, like there's that like walkway that people often will take. That is a good indicator that we probably should have an island there. I definitely know when you're trying to go towards like the Valley Gates, that place is a nightmare. like that, like you should probably have 2 of the, or like, you know, 3 for, because it's like a triangle, 3 of these like kinds of like middle lane like intersections there. Like I think that having many of these like interspersed would allow people to get to the wilderness or get to these other places that they might naturally be trying to go to, but that is very difficult to access as of right now. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sarah?
Hi.
Sarah, you're breaking
in
up quite a bit.
noisy place.
Okay.
Sign off now. So my question is, whoops, can you please save and share the chat? Did you hear that, or should I type it into the chat?
I heard you. Yeah, we will save the chat and we will attach it to the meeting notes.
Great. Thank you. See you later.
Thanks, Sarah. Tom?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
When might we see actual traffic calming measures on Circuit Drive? These were described as immediate needs 3 years ago. We've seen zero, or as what I can see is practically zero in that period. Speed humps and showed up in the neighborhood of Franklin Park in a delightfully rapid space of time. A few months ago, they've been wildly successful and popular with everybody I know who lives around here. So I'm not sure why we're not seeing traffic calming on Circuit Drive. What we are seeing is cars racing along this thoroughfare through our park. So I'd like you to address those questions, please. Thanks very much.
Sure, thanks, Tom. So, we started this process just this past spring with this design team. And then because we do value, the community engagement piece of it, it certainly does, prolong some of that initial work, but we think there's a lot of value in this. And I think just judging by the many comments we've received, it is worthwhile, but certainly there's, I know, some urgency here too. So I think that the process and the goal is to, really get it going as early as possible in 2026, but we also are needing to go to landmarks. So that's another piece of it. And, I think we certainly want to make sure we're doing the right moves here, as I think Jeff alluded to earlier. So I understand the desire for it to happen as quickly as possible. We're certainly, doing what we can to make that a quick turnaround.
Landmarks needs to sign off on speed humps?
So the park,
I can't imagine how that could be. Go ahead.
I know the entire park is actually landmarked property. So, and I mean, this is a park road. It's not even like a public right-of-way road. So that's where it has slightly different requirements, and it does add that little bit of that extra step in the process.
So I understand your answer. You're saying, just I'll get off now, but you're saying the soonest we will see any physical traffic calming will be sometime during 2026. Is that correct? Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, early, I mean,
That would be the earliest.
early 2026 we'll be targeting that. So
amazing. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Guthrie.
Hey, I just don't think that we should take shutting down the through traffic on Circuit Drive off the table. It's a low cost intervention, just a couple of gates on either side. There would still be access to all of the same parking lots that exists today, to the zoo, to the golf course, to the hospital. All of that would still be there. It would have huge benefits to all the park users. And I mean, there's hundreds of miles of roadways in the city of Boston, and this somewhat short 2-lane road just doesn't need to exist. It didn't exist in the original plan for the park, in implementation for the park, and it shouldn't exist now. I mean, parks are not there to facilitate transportation. That they are there to facilitate green space.
Guthrie, if I could jump in really quickly, we definitely have heard the concerns, and I know in the chat we've heard both sides of this, but just as a reminder, closing it is not up for discussion as part of this process. There could be a later phase where that conversation can be opened back up from the master plan or any of those stepping stones along the way. But just as a reminder, this is not that conversation for that. That's a future conversation. So we're not saying that it can't happen. We're not saying that it will happen. We're saying that that discussion isn't part of this current scope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I just don't quite understand why, because to me it seems like if the goal is like, I mean, the goal of most design processes is to do like low effort or low cost, high impact interventions, and that seems like it falls under that category.
If everyone were in agreement that that was the right solution, I think it would be something that could be acted upon, but it's something that we heard loud and clear that there is not a consensus on this. There's not a consensus on this call about it. There wasn't one during the action plan. And we promised that before any decisions would be made, that would be its own process. We also talked about that we needed to do a lot more transportation analysis. And so this just isn't that project. This project, and I get what you're saying, it seems like it would be easy, but it's not. It's not even easy to get consensus with the people that are in this meeting. So I hear you, but like I said, that's really not where this project is going right now.
Oh, that's fair. I doubt there will be consensus on much of anything, but and
I would agree.
That's
Yeah.
all right.
Right,
but yeah,
that is
I
a
think
conversation for another day for sure.
for sure. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Representative Holmes?
So again, I have to apologize in the middle of 3 meetings, but there is consensus from the part of the neighborhood I represent. We will not close Circuit Drive. We will come burn that place down before we close it. There is clear consensus on my side. I hear a lot from maybe the JP side that it will be an easy decision to close down Circuit Drive. You are going to, even that thought blocks off the entire, the blackest neighborhood in this entire state is what I represent. You are proposing closing down the blackest neighborhood in this Commonwealth and think that that's a good idea. It is not. To cut us off from all of the Longwood medical area, all of the Jamaica Way, all of that side of Boston. No, we're not going to come to a consensus. Definitely not on this meeting. And that's why I was asking you guys, go do what's good, which is make it safe, deal with the drainage, and all of those things that you've been proposing. Do not derail this project by even proposing Circuit Drive. All of us gain from the improvements that you're talking about, everybody. And so I think that is the right place to stay on this conversation. I'm sorry that I'm distracted with multiple Zooms, but I wanted to, at least before you end it, just know where I will stand on this as the person who represents the other side of the district. Thanks.
Thank you, Rep. Holmes. And yeah, you're right. Just to clarify, we're not proposing it as part of this project for sure. So I appreciate those comments and hearing the thoughts from your district. And I know it's not every single person, because I know that there was a comment about that in the chat too, but thank you for sharing that with us. And just to clarify for everyone, this project is not proposing closing Circuit Drive.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. It looks like we're running out of time here, but I really appreciate you all being here and all the comments and feedback that we received. We'll certainly let you know when the meeting recording is on the project webpage and the notes are up and the slides in case you want to look at them again or share them with other folks. And we'll keep you updated on the scheduling of the next meeting. So thank you all again and have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.